you ended the book with a discussion about what you miss from EMS, and not really the medicine, but more the chaos, the screaming meth heads, the nighttime driving around town, the shooting scenes, the shitty motel rooms. Um, when I look back, having been out of EMS for about 5 years now, like I shake my head at the crazy scenarios that we were caught up in on a weekly basis, because they just don't happen in the ER. I mean, we see crazy patients and crazy medical scenarios, but I'm not in that shitty hotel room, giving D50 to somebody in the dark. And so I relate to that a lot. Like it's less the medicine that I miss and just kind of the craziness of it. And I both miss it and don't miss it kind of at the same time. What is it that kind of makes you miss these scenarios? And you've kind of talked about this a little bit already, but how are you feeling in kind of retirement from EMS, and would you go back and change anything?
I mean, I think the thing I missed, and I'd be willing to wager the thing most people miss is when you go through those experiences, you go through them with another person. You know, you have old partners out there that you bump into, and with any of them, there's a call. There's a specific call, and when you see each other, you laugh, and it's like there's that bond that comes between two people when they've run a shit kicker together, and when it all shakes, however it shakes out, and it's just like just the two of you, and like your shirts are untucked and you're like sweaty, and it's cold outside, but you're still like in short sleeves and sweaty because it's just been like it has been on for an hour and 20 minutes. And there were times when you were like terrified because you're like, I think we're gonna kill this guy, or I think this guy's gonna kill us. And like, are we doing the right thing? Are we doing the wrong thing? Are we doing anything? And it comes off, and you drop them off, and it's just like the crate, and the ambulance is a disaster, and you're just like, but you're just like laughing because it whole thing was so ridiculous. And nobody like in part of you's like, what are we doing here? Like, how did this happen? How did we wind up with this as our lives? And that's not something you can ever explain really to anybody. It's very difficult to explain to someone. You say in some, shitty motel given D50, like right away, like I'm right there. You know what I mean? Like I know like we've all been there. And so when I see people that I did all that with, like there's that connection, and we laugh and we remember those moments. And it's sort of in the same way that like trauma becomes not memory but emotion, and that's where people have so much trouble with PTSD and stuff, because it triggers a different part of your brain. Those memories do the same thing. Like when you're with those people, I'm convinced that the reason that I feel such tremendous affection for them, regardless of how many years it's been since I've seen them, is because what they trigger in me is that emotional response that we had to that crazy call. And just night after night of crazy calls, and going into it, like showing up, you work night shift, you show up, the sun's going down, and it's you and your partner, and like, what you're getting yourself into. It's Friday night, like you can feel the electricity in the streets. And that's what you're going to be going into. And so that's, all that madness, like it really was, it's like being in a Western, like the sheriff, who comes rolling into this sort of lawless town, or not even the sheriff, just some wanderer who comes into this lawless town and has no idea what he's getting himself into until he gets there. And then, he's got to figure out how to manage it. I mean, that's what the job is. And you do that with somebody else. And so the fun of it, the adventure of it, seeing parts of town and parts of the world, parts of people's lives, the craziness of people's lives. I mean, all the babies that you deliver, all the people that, you pronounce dead, the shootings and the madness. I mean, all the crazy things you get to see. But you get to see them with somebody else. You get to experience that with somebody else. And that's a hard thing. It's a hard thing to let go of. And especially because, when you leave, and this is something, I think a lot of people learn, kind of the hard way. I know I certainly did. The only thing left when you leave, really, like the one thing they tell you, they don't tell you, is that when you leave, like, we're going to take everything except for the memories. And not all the memories are good, like there's those bad memories. And, there was for a while, I know for me, like I would go to bed, and it isn't to sound I'm not in any way trying to be overly dramatic, but there are probably stretches for a lot of people where you go to bed and the last thing you hear before you fall asleep is somebody saying to you like, "Hey, don't let me die," and then they die. Like we all have those handful of calls. We just think like there's just no two ways to split it. Like I was just not good enough in that moment. Like that person might be alive if I had been better on that moment. Like that happens. We all have those calls and those things, the bad memories, the good memories. That's all that you can carry with you. And so those people you were with really become incredibly important. I know you had some other questions that were mixed in there, but I got sidetracked.
No, that answers them. I think that's a good point, especially about the partners, because I mean, faces just come to my mind of people I still know, people I see infrequently now as they bring in patients, and I'm like, I can remember the crazy calls, and I can't really put words to the feeling I have about those particular people, but I know that I'm closer with them because of just the crazy stuff you deal with. I mean, you go through hell with some of these people, on some of these calls, and it's, it does give you a bond that is not really easy to articulate. So that makes a lot of sense. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about American Sirens as well, if you've got a little bit more time. So this one you wrote and was published in 2022. And I've been recommending this to a bunch of people because it is one of the best historical accounts of EMS that I've ever read. I can't even imagine the amount of research and details you put in this book. I don't even know how you got all this information. I can't imagine how much work it was. But it's a great history of EMS and specifically Freedom House as one of the first ambulance services. I wanted to just read one quote out of the book that I really liked. To practice medicine in the street as a paramedic must first gain control of the environment, come in too hot, swept up in the panic and rush, and everything goes to hell. I think that's so true, and it's an element we don't really have to deal with as acutely in the ER. The ER has so many different controls in place and so much staff that the default is usually more calm, and a scene is just so different. I can think of tons of scenes I've been on where it's totally out of control. You're in a bar, everybody's drunk, everybody wants to help. You're trying to find the bloody patient somewhere in there who's also drunk. It's so difficult to even get to the part where you're practicing medicine in these calls. Can you talk a little bit about how in EMS there's all these other factors besides the medicine that we have to deal with before you can actually get to practicing the medicine?
I mean, that's sort of the great magic trick of the whole thing is that, you're doing this almost, whatever the mystical version of the job is, you're doing it in the most, mundane places, it's one thing to see surgery in a surgical suite, it's like it feels at home there. But when you're intubating somebody in a bathroom with some crappy bar, then it just feels completely different. And so, I don't know that there's any way to teach somebody how to manage a scene. It's like it's sort of an instinct that you have to hone over time. And that to me was always the biggest thing. It was like, we've arrived, and you do the scenarios, and they say you sort of hinted at it, scene, everybody holds up their hand, scene safe, BSI. Well, what is that scene safe that we say really quickly when you're doing your NREMT practicals? There's so much wrapped up in it. And honestly, that's 94% of what EMS is like those two words that you spit out in the beginning of a scenario as if they don't really matter. I had this partner, big guy. Thank God he was big. Big is like 6'5", 240 or something, like a large human. And we came into a house that was crowded and everybody was going crazy. And there was a girl inside. As I recall, she's having a panic attack, which, as people, it doesn't look like what it is. And people really freak out. And, you got to remember, this is part of scene management. You got to remember that every person you're dealing with is a layperson. What is normal to you is totally not normal to them. And by the way, what's normal to you in an ambulance is not normal, period. A gunshot wound is normal. Someone giving birth is normal. Someone dying is normal. A person falling off of a building, landing on the concrete and having their brain shoot out at the top of their head and hit the building and then slide down and leave this big slimy trail. not normal, but it's all totally normal. These are all things that you're going to see through the course of your day. So, we arrive, and of course they're freaking out because she's having this panic attack, which to them, as always, looks like either a bad asthma attack or like, oh my God, she's having a heart attack, which, they always say that about the 24-year-old girl, who's pretty much never having a heart attack. And there's, 30 or 40 people in this house, and they're angry, and they're angry at us for our apparent nonchalance. And they start getting in our faces. And thank God he was as big as he was. And he just kind of like went up to the biggest guy he could find and put his hand in his chest and just pushed him against the wall. And the way in movies someone gets put up against the wall, that just doesn't seem humanly possible. Like their feet aren't quite touching. Like that's what he did. And everybody saw this, and they're all like, oh yeah, no, we're cool. Yeah, no, we're cool. And but that's step one. It's like, how do I manage all these people? And barring, being some big old country boy, it's all in your approach. Like you walk in and, you've got to immediately present a sense of calm and a sense of control without a sense of arrogance or a sense of like belittling or diminishing their situation. You need to say like, okay, it was an emergency and it is now something that's being handled and I'm the one handling it. And if you can convey that, which a lot of that is honestly in body language and how you approach people, what you do to look like you're in charge, which is to walk right into the dead center of everything. Like, good God, do not stand on the edge. Like, walk into the middle of this thing, which is, always going to piss off cops. Because if I could tell you how many times I've walked over bullet casings, but and that's just part of the, like, you got to get in and get seeing what's going on. Ideally, you don't trample evidence, but maybe you'll be as big of a dumbass as I was. But
I've trampled my share of evidence.
yeah, we all do, but you've got to walk into the middle of something that by its very nature, by definition, like by its own name, so literally by definition, is out of control, and bring control to it. And that's like step one. And it's never going to be like, my giant partner aside, it's never going to be, you're never going to physically make those people listen to you. You are going to have to convince them that, oh wait, this whole thing just got better. And so you need to be able to like block out the craziness of what's going on and focus on the patient. Or if it's your personality, I had a partner who would walk into like the scene you described in the club. He would come in and he would just be like dancing, and he'd be like, what is happening? And like would talk to the beat of the song, and he would make people laugh, and it would like diffuse something, because there's all this tension that's in the air. There's this anxiety, and then there's also this feeling of like, is this person going to do the right thing? Are they going to do what we think needs to be done? And that's what you're trying to convey, is that like, hey, and even if it's just like you and grandpa standing over grandma, like you need to convince him that, like, don't worry, I understand how important this is, and the right thing is about to happen, and that's step one. And it all happens in the first couple of minutes. And if it doesn't, if you walk in and you realize like you can't, that's when medicine goes out the window, and you just grab your patient, toss them over your shoulder, and you run like hell. Let's just get out of here. Let's do this someplace where we can actually do it. We've all done that, a handful of times. You drive down the street and you're like, just give me 400 yards and then pull over. We'll figure this.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a few reoccurring characters in the book, and I love the story about John. Throughout the book, EMS gives this guy purpose and drive. He overcomes a ton of obstacles in early EMS, putting his head down in a lot of circumstance and just doing the job day after day. And I think EMS was that for a lot of us, where we found our purpose, me included. I was pretty lost after high school and found my calling in EMS and emergency medicine ultimately. Because being an EMT or a paramedic, like we were talking about, kind of gives you this authority on scene, and you feel a little bit more ambitious, or you feel like you have purpose when you put on that uniform. Can you expound a little bit on how EMS gave you purpose and kind of gave John purpose?
I think like you, I was young, a little bit aimless, certainly untested, unproven. Well, in my case, not untested, once tested and failed. But, I felt unproven. I just felt like there was a whole world out there, and by its very nature, the world is a place of action, and I had never really taken action, and I was like, I want to be one of those people, I just want to be one of those people. I want to be involved in the action. And so it opened that door and taught me all the things that it teaches people, which of course are so much more humbling and down to earth than maybe what your first instincts are, and for John, his situation was the same, but also like much more extreme. I mean, you're talking about a person who, is a black guy, grows up or is born into an incredibly segregated city in the South, and, lived in a neighborhood in the middle. I mean, it's the middle of Atlanta, that through the early 1960s did not have running water or electricity, which is just kind of like a mind-blowing thing. But that was, that was how his family and all their neighbors were treated. It was basically a shanty town in the middle of a city. And, so that's what he's born into. Then, his mother dies, and she doesn't just like a stroke or heart attack. She dies of alcoholism. His father suddenly now trying to raise two kids while working 7 days a week, which is completely impractical. And so he puts them in an orphanage. And I think he thought it was going to be temporary, but of course it wasn't. I mean, he died a few years later. So, that's what this kid is born into. What a tremendous set of challenges for someone. And then he kind of gets like the little orphan Annie thing, where he's adopted by family he didn't know existed. And so it's literally like maybe the luckiest thing that could possibly happen to someone in his situation. And yet even that doesn't go right, because, by that point he's a teenager and he's difficult and he's confused. And he doesn't know how to be in a family, and he's been on his own, and so many things go so wrong for so long that he's not a good person to be in a family. And so then there's talk of like, hey, should we send this kid back? And then outside of the home, he's, ostracized because, he's got one set of clothes, and he's got this strong Southern accent, and he's in a northern city. And so he's, has trouble fitting in, and, sort of makes his way through high school, by relying solely on himself, and just like, I'm just going to block out the world. And he's just, kind of an angry young man. There's plenty of those walking around. And then one night he encounters this thing, like he's trying desperately to find a way to make his mark on the world. It's not working. And then he sees, two young black men practicing medicine, and his mind is blown. It's so difficult now, to imagine a world where that didn't exist. But, at the time that he sees this Freedom House ambulance come screaming down the street, and two guys hop out treating a patient, your emergency, if you lived in the city of Pittsburgh, your emergency was handled by two aging cops. These were not like prime, of their life cops. These were old guys who were in the last few years of their career, who've been given like this sort of plum assignment. They didn't have any equipment. They didn't have any training. They just tossed you in the back of a paddy wagon. And if you were black and poor like he was, they might not come at all, because, the assumption was usually that, well, those people over there, they're just drunk. So that's, they're not our problem. We're going to focus on other people. So you either got bad care or no care. And suddenly, everything that we know today to exist in terms of EMS comes walking into his life. I mean, just how much, it would be like if somebody, Rip Van Winkle, wakes up today and he sees the internet, it'd be like, whoa, how, like, I don't even know where to begin. He'd probably be TikToking by the end of the day, but like, how would he even perceive what he's looking at? And so that's the situation he was in. And so it's not only this world changing thing, but it's the world being changed by people like him, who have been told, hey, you don't even have a place in the world, let alone an opportunity to change it. So, it'd be impossible to oversell how big a moment that was for him, and what, how big an opportunity he perceived that to be. And so for someone who had been cast aside and had never been given a break, he suddenly finds himself in position to be part of this revolutionary thing. So imagine that. Imagine what a leap that is from where he's been his entire life, the first 21 years of his life, to where he's about to go over the next few months. And that's how big a thing the job was for him, and that's what it gave to him.
Yeah, and you do such a great job of like showing his full circle of his career, going from orderly in the hospital, which orderlies were like the lowest of the low. They cleaned the rooms. Nobody talked to him, all the way to him intubating a patient, like practicing paramedicine at the highest level, even what we consider kind of the highest level now, like intubation, and bringing a patient into that hospital ER. Like, his full circle's an amazing description, and just how far he'd come, and practicing EMS at the highest level is just a super cool description.